Well, I hope 2025 has been treating you well so far. Really interesting video for you. We have a guest. His name is Barry, and he's in Indiana. This is an amazing man, but the background to the video is I met him through the channel, which is one of the greatest things about having a channel. I've had the privilege of meeting people directly or indirectly around the world. Barry is one of them. Crucial fellow. As you know, you buy these high-value collectible rifles, and most of the time, what ammo do they take? If they're a muzzle loader, of course, that's self-explanatory. But if it's a cartridge firing rifle, you know, you have to do the chamber casting thing, and then you discover that there is no parent case, sometimes, not often. And then you run into a situation like this, and I've shown you this rifle before. It's a Wesley Richards monkey tail. So between black powder cartridges, between black powder rifles and brass cartridges, there was a period where the breech was adapted or being adapted, and slowly we come to our senses, sort of. And this takes paper cartridges. So into this rear breech, that's kind of a redundancy anyway, you insert a paper cartridge that has the bullet, the powder, a couple of wads for sealing, and then you close the action, pull the hammer back, percussion cap, the rest you can figure out. But so what goes in here? Anyway, Barry's an expert at figuring out, what was the original loading. And to determine these kinds of things sometimes takes historical research, or you have to be, part of a community of collectors. And from what I gather, Indiana, Kentucky, Mississippi, those areas, the knowledge base is incredible there. I guess people took an interest. And so they can, in a way, resurrect these old rifles. And there's a bonus to the whole story. Because cartridges weren't being made or stopped being made, or it's a situation like this, quite often you can pick up quite high value rifles, and the bore is excellent because it probably sat in a closet. Everybody would look at it, but who studies guns really except people like us? And so they would just say, well, there's no ammo available for it. They checked at the, wherever, hardware store. And so it sat again, maybe was a wall hanger for a couple of generations. And anyhow, if you're lucky enough to find those and find someone like Barry, he can come up with the ammo. And it isn't just something that fits. That's one type of situation, but you have to know what powder, what pressure, what bullet, what's the rate of twist in the barrel to stabilize the bullet you're using. If you're casting bullets out of lead, what is the right alloy so that the lead works, or the alloy works best in the rifling, and then study the rifling. Is what kind of rifling? It's endless stuff. Anyway, here's our impromptu meeting. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and like I said, an immensely knowledgeable person Barry is, and it's hard, to extract all the knowledge, and maybe it isn't all fireworks, but for people who are interested, I think you'll like it, and if it sparks, no puns intended, further interest, there's nothing but gain, and I mean not just financial gain, but you meet some incredible people. Anyway, enjoy, and we'll see you next time. Anyway, what I should do is probably introduce you, Barry. So
Yeah.
you're in Indiana,
Yeah.
and I actually wrote down all of the things that you told me, and I was surprised. I
Yeah.
may as well read them off to you because it's pretty amazing, I think, for our viewers.
Yeah.
So you've got all kinds of shoots in Friendship, Indiana. You've got Kentucky down here. You've got some Spring Nationals back in Friendship. Looks like Friendship's a pretty busy
Yeah.
shooting place. Then you're in Louisville, Kentucky. Then you're in Lexington, Kentucky. Then you're in Franklin, Tennessee. Did I get that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, unbelievable. So,
Yeah.
yeah, tell you, people will love to hear
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, I can talk about how, I consider this to be at least the black powder epicenter of the world, in this area, because truly it is. All right.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'm going to talk about too is like when somebody asks, where do I get black powder from? Well, I'm like, I got a dozen places I get black powder from because it's, because of friendship. It is such a, ubiquitous thing. So, but
It's the
yeah, yeah. What I have is I have a whole bunch of different styles of cartridges with different techniques of forming and making the cartridges, and I can just go through maybe each of the major types. All right.
Mhm.
I was thinking we do something like that in terms of cartridges.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's very useful for people because nobody knows
right,
how to get these old guns working again.
right.
And I did want to say, Barry, I've picked up guns so cheap, I'm sure you have too, because no one knows how to get them working
That's right.
again, and they think it's never going to happen again. And I've always been an optimist, and I've always found a way.
Really.
Maybe a couple of exceptions, but most of the time there is a way. Okay, well, let's start with something simple. So somebody goes out, they buy a black powder gun, and they have no idea what cartridge it takes because they're used to the rifle being a muzzle loader. This is a very familiar story to me.
Right.
And then I say it's actually not a muzzle loader, and whatever it is, let's use the Wesley Richards. So it's a monkey tail that wouldn't be the case. But how do you starting from scratch? So you now bought something. Pretend you have no knowledge of guns. Well, how do you do it, and where do you go from there? How do you end up developing a load?
Sure. Sure. And what, maybe to preface that too is, I do tend to focus on historical shooting, how it was actually done, how they were actually made. So of course, identifying the weapon is first and foremost. All right. So if it's something that's really obscure, and muzzle loaders tend to be easier, but let's say it's a breech loader, all right, which tends, of course, to be, what goes in it is much more difficult to make. Establishing the era that the rifle was made, who made it, is probably your first bit. All right. One of the things you can rarely ever do is fully make assumptions that, oh, this is a Martini Henry style rifle.
Right, right.
Therefore, it must be 450 or 5.77 450. Well, maybe, but there was also quite a number of variants made. And so you do need to establish that. So if you really don't have a clue of what it is, then it behooves yourself to make what's called a chamber cast. All right.
Mhm,
And a chamber cast uses Ceresco, all right, which is a low temperature like this, right?
mhm.
It looks like lead, but it's not. It's a very low temperature alloy, right? And you will literally take a ramrod with a cleaning patch, maybe put it down the muzzle, and so it's just beyond the chamber. And then you melt the Ceresco and literally pour it in. All right. And it sets pretty quick. Once it's set, you tap that out and you have a casting of your chamber. All
Mhm.
right. And then you can, from there, you can use your calipers and take dimensions. And when you have the dimensions, then you go into a book like Cartridges of the World.
For
And
sure.
the wonderful thing about Cartridges of the World is in the very back of it. All right. They literally have dimensions. So, for instance, if you know the neck diameter, which is a great place to start, because neck diameter often translates very well into bullet diameter. All right, so you can just find here, the neck diameter, one of those kiddings, and just go through it until you find neck diameter that's what you have on your casting, and then you can backwards from there the length, the diameter of the rim, all right, the thickness of the rim. These are all in this table, and from there you can usually then find exactly what your cartridge is.
Right.
So that's in the very back of Cartridges of the World, and then once you have it, then you can go to with your cartridge and read some more about it.
Mhm.
So that's probably your best place to start once you've identified what your what your round actually is, and then it's trying to figure out now when you know it. So let's say it's a Martini Henry. So let's say you know that. So it's a 5.77 450 Martini Henry.
Hmm.
Well, now comes the decision: do you make it or do you buy it? All right, and of course, buying involves for trying to find somebody who makes them. And there are, if you go on the internet, there are people who do make some of this brass for you. But more often than not, you are going to be making it yourself. All right.
Hmm. Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's where the more shop you have, all right, the more successful you'll be.
Right.
Yeah. So let's just go down that sample if you don't mind for the Martini Henry. All right. Um, ends up Martini Henry cases, and its older brother, the Snyder, my personal favorite. All right. Are actually derived off of the same case. All right.
Mhm.
So in that case, though, is almost impossible to find. But it ends up that good old, Magtech, all right, they make 24 gauge brass shot shells. That 24 gauge, right, ends up to have dimensionally the same rim, all right, and roughly the same body diameter as the base of both the Snyder and the 5.77 450 Martini Henry.
That's really interesting. Where's Magtech from? Is that
Magtech, I believe it's somewhere. I believe Magtech is Brazil.
that's
Uh,
pretty amazing.
yeah, but it's distributed. Yeah, made in Brazil, but it's distributed through a number of American online
Hmm.
presence. So, but yeah, from there, there's a number of options, and one of the things is you can then make your own. You need to cut them to length. First thing is always the trimming, right?
Yeah.
So this one happens to be, you can go on to, like places like Etsy, all right, and get these 3D printed holders which hold it. And then this is designed to go in the standard Harbor Freight chop saw. All right, so you can put that in and chop it, all right? Or if you have to, you can also make your own. So here's my Snyder. This is a homemade contraption. And it's the same idea. I take my shell, I put it in there, and this goes into the chop saw, chops it the correct length. So this is the Snyder length, and this one does the Martini Henry length. All right. So then we have then we have the brass the correct length. Then the next thing is to make it the correct shape. All right. So there is, generally we want to anneal the brasses. We're going to send it through some pretty radical presses. So then you just send it through your press with the appropriate dies, and out will come, hopefully, then the next step. All right. So that's one that's actually been formed for Martini Henry. So now we have a perfectly shaped Martini Henry case. All right. Hasn't been made in, 120 years. Right.
Yeah.
But, and every time I make a new case, I feel like I've, brought a child into this world.
It
There's
looks
another
pretty good,
Martini Henry
Barry.
case.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And from that point on, then it's all just, reloading. And there we have it. We have a Martini Henry case.
Hmm.
Right. And it's actually not very difficult, but I'm not going to say it's cheap either, because ultimately you do need to have a few basic tools. Probably in this case, in the world of reforming cartridge cases, the most important tool you're going to have is a heavy duty press. I have
Hmm.
a lot of really nice presses to do, very clean precision reloading,
Hmm.
but when it comes to reforming brass, all right, this is what you need, all right,
What is
because
that? A rock chucker? I can't see.
this is actually like a rock chucker would be good. This one is actually the new Rebel press from RCBS. It's
Mhm.
basically it's kind of replaced the old rock chucker, but yeah, it's a heavy duty press, and it can take the larger the inch and a quarter dies.
Oh, okay.
All right, and
Yeah.
right now I have on it um, a bushing, so I can use the regular 1 inch.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah, right. So yeah, and the process, like a Snyder, is very similar, just not as radical of a reform.
Yeah,
Right.
no necking down. That's good.
Yeah.
So how would you, I'm probably asking an unfair question, but getting back to my Wesley Richards.
Okay.
So here we have the barrel is so long it doesn't fit in the studio. So here we have, let's say that we knew nothing. I
Yeah.
don't know whether Encyclopedia of Guns has anything. I don't think so because it's not really a cartridge, it's
Right.
paper. Um, so I looked at the bore. I think I told you the bore looks excellent. Uh, how would you how do you go about working with something like this? How are we going to get this to shoot?
Right. Okay. So this is where I will address the power of the internet. All right. And there really are some fantastic resources. And one resource that I use again and again, it's called the British Muzzleloader Forum. All right. And it is probably one of the places where you'll find world experts, true experts, all right, on these subjects. And almost always you can find somebody there, all right, who will have information on it, including
Mhm.
construction information. And most importantly, they'll be able to point you to real reference materials. Right? And those reference materials are out there, right? Whether they're a book or some old manual.
Mhm.
And, so I maybe like to bring up two the old manuals. A good friend of mine, Hugh Knight, who runs the historical shooting group on Facebook, he has put together a digital archive of original source material, with high quality scans, and he's making them made that available, and he's working on indexing it. And in there, you can find period correct, original period sources on most of this. All right,
Okay.
so yeah,
Well, hopefully those 3 rounds will arrive. Um, it's ridiculous, but I think I paid like $45 a round.
yeah,
But they're apparently original. I'll show them, I'll make a video.
yeah,
And maybe that in the end will be economical because at least I can see if they're
yeah,
authentic. But the
yeah.
guy selling them didn't really know if they're authentic. They just look
Oh,
authentic in
right,
every way. So,
right. Well, we
um,
can
I,
definitely get some information on it. Yeah,
yeah. And this one, just because we've talked about it before, I noticed something today. It's serial number 725, and the bore on this one is 450. You know how they
yeah,
have all the proof marks? I don't
yeah,
know. Can you see everything? Look how beautifully it's made here. You
yeah.
can, you can see all this. Anyway, fantastic rifle. Okay, so you've got everything together. I guess 577 Snyder and 577 450 must be your most commonly made rounds.
Well, it is fairly common, but I do a whole bunch of stuff now. What like the monkey tail, that will be a paper cartridge, all right. And of course, paper cartridges come in all kinds of forms. This being one of my favorite, all right. This is the cartridge for a British P53 series Enfield rifle. All right, and these are just beautiful cartridges. How they're constructed, all right, and how they work. So once we identified the bullet, all right, you either find an equivalent modern made mold, all right. So for example, you know here's a mold for this one is a custom made mold to make bullets for the Swiss Vetterli. All right. So you either find one or places like this case is called Accurate. You actually can put the exact specs of your bullet in, and they'll make the mold for you.
Hmm.
All right. So then we have the bullet. All right.
What
Um,
caliber? What is that? What
that
is
one is this one is for my 41 Swiss.
41 Swiss?
All
I
right. So
have
this one,
almost an identical mold, looks
yeah,
identical, made by Rapine,
yeah, right.
Rapine, and
Repeat. Yeah,
it's for the 577. I've used it like for 20 years. It's
yeah,
a dual cavity, makes perfect bullets.
yeah. So yeah, so with your monkey tail, then we'll find out what the construction was like of the bullet of the paper cartridge, because I believe that was a paper cartridge, and they
Mhm.
do vary. Now there are some standard kind of cartridges you'll find. Like the classic is this is an 1855 Springfield, all
Mm.
right, which was slightly more um, resource heavy than what became the standard 1860 um, roll Minet ball that was used in the Civil War. So
Mhm.
this is the same bullet, all right, but a different construction of the cartridge, and the construction actually means a lot. All right, it basically it's how easy or difficult it is to use in the field. All
Mhm.
right. And when we get to paper cartridges, there's a couple of techniques that do need to be mastered. There's some things like you can see here. This is where um, the the paper is choked to form these places where the paper has to come together and not come apart. Right, so you can see this top is choked, and this fold, right, the way this
Mhm.
fold works
What
makes
is
it so
that, Barry? What is that tail? What is that?
that, yeah, this tail is actually, it serves a number of purposes. Right, one, imagine it's in your cartridge box.
Mhm,
So it's your pull to pull it out of the cartridge box first.
mhm.
And then in the case of this cartridge, it's what goes into your mouth. Right. And you tear at that point, keeping your thumb over that to
Powder.
leave the powder in, and then the
Mhm.
powder can go down the muzzle loader, and then the bullet is pressed out and pushed down after it. Yeah. Something like the
I've
Enfield.
seen, yeah, yeah, I've seen those
The,
before. Yeah.
the Enfield cartridge is slightly way more parts in construction. All right. The tube here is pretty solid with contains the powder. The bullet is down here. And I don't know if you can see, but there's an actual lube coating on the outside. So this is actually becomes a paper patched bullet.
Mm.
It's
What
all
is
inside.
that? Beeswax on the coating?
Yes, it's a combination of beeswax and um, lamb tallow.
Hmm.
All
Wow.
right.
Yeah.
All right. And this one, because there's only one layer of paper, you can actually don't need to tear with your teeth. You can actually just nicely pull it off. And because the cylinder is pretty robust, you have a
Hmm.
nice pouring into your muzzle loader,
Right.
and then the bullet then you invert it goes in, and you literally snap the top off, leaving the bullet in the muzzle of the barrel pre-lubed. So these work very very nicely. So this was the standard British cartridge. And in the American Civil War, they were somewhat used by the Confederacy, although not heavily,
Hmm.
because the paper dimensions needed to be very accurate, right? And that is another thing that you need to concern yourself with is anything that goes down the barrel affects the dimensions of the bullets. All right. So something like this needs to be very precise. So the paper
What
we
caliber
use,
is that? What caliber?
this is a 5.77.
Okay.
You're going to hear us use 5.77 quite a bit.
Yeah,
Right?
I can
It
imagine.
it
Yeah.
was pretty much the standard from the early 1850s through the mid 1860s. 1870s is where the caliber drop occurred down to the 45. So your monkey tail being a 45.
Hmm.
All right. This one, is the paper dimensions are not critical because none of this paper goes down the barrel. All right. The bullet it just holds the bullet. All right. So those are things to take into account. I believe in
Hmm.
the case of your monkey tail, some of the cartridge actually does go into put the whole cartridge into the mechanism. So dimensionality is important.
Hmm. Yeah, people ask me, so you fire the paper cartridge, and I'm saying the obvious, the paper then burns, so there's
Well,
nothing plugging your barrel, or do you have to, what are the details?
right. In this case, it becomes a paper patch. So the paper comes out with the bullet. Right. Another example of a paper patch party. This is a martini. Another martini Henry is a 4.58 bullet, and they are paper patched. So in this case, you do the paper patching, as you're before you assemble the bullet, right? And then of course these will then, when they get loaded, go in,
Hmm.
right, and end up like that. So
And
that paper.
is somebody making those paper patches, making those paper holders, or you make them?
I make them, and after you figure it out, their dimensionality is critical. All right, for it to work. All right, but once you figure that out, I do make a metal template with which after it's all figured out, and that's trial and error actually figuring it out.
Yeah.
And then I have that. Then I can cut them out of whatever paper I used when I was coming up with
Mhm.
those dimensions. All right.
Is it
Um,
kind of a, when you've made them, so then it looks like it's kind of a, it looks like you've made a cup out of
Yeah,
paper.
yeah, that's well, yeah, basically what's right. You roll the bullet, or you roll the bullet around the paper, and let me see if I can find one here. Hold on.
Hmm.
So, for example, this is that metal template I was telling you about.
Hmm.
Right? It has very important notes on it because the direction that you roll it in matters. Because otherwise, if it's rolled counter to the rifling, when
Hmm.
the bullet goes down the barrel, it will unwind. So
That's
you
no
want it to
good.
get tighter as it goes
Yeah.
down the barrel. right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So and then you cut them out. So this is actually a template, but with a bullet. So here's a martini bullet, a bare one. All right. You will literally roll it. All right, like this. I don't know if you can see that.
I can see it perfectly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, we make it wet first. I dampen the paper, and then the bit that is left over just gets gently tucked in. All right, and then I set these on a candle warmer. All right, and that warms them up.
Yeah.
That dries them up, and as the paper dries, it clenches
Hmm.
on. And then the final step, I will run it through a loop sizer. I don't know if you can see in the back that orange tool in the
Yeah.
back. All right, which literally will size it perfectly. You would think it would tear the paper apart, but it doesn't. So ends up
Right.
paper is actually a pretty strong clamping force. So and then
Hmm.
you end up with something like this that is very now the patch will come off after it leaves the barrel.
Hmm.
It will come off, but the whole trip down the barrel, this is what's engaging the rifling, and it does a number of things. One, make sure it fully engages the rifling, and it also, as we got as rifles got more powerful, like the Martini Henry,
Yeah.
right? It also helps prevent leading. All
Yeah,
right.
that's fantastic. Years and years ago, I made a bunch of 4440 rounds with a fellow who had to set up something like you. So all I was doing was following instructions. But he used a greenish kind of pastel paper from England, he said. And we made all these 4440 rounds. They've never been easy to find. And
Yeah.
they worked perfectly. And they didn't come off in the barrel, and they were perfectly inscribed with rifling. I remember we checked, it was about maybe a few feet, maybe 10 or 15 feet in front of the muzzle on the
Yeah.
ground. Does that happen with yours? And you pick them up
Yes.
and
Yep. Yeah.
yeah,
You can
you
actually
can
find them.
see. Yeah, it was inscribed perfectly.
So
Okay.
yeah. The other thing is you become very quickly become a big aficionado of paper.
Hmm.
Right, in this. My poor wife has spent many an hour with me in the local store that has paper, and I'm there with my calipers measuring paper to get it just right. Because some of these, again, when dimensionality is important. All right. So, and then once you find a source of the paper, then you hoard that paper
Hmm.
because in this age, good paper is not in high demand anymore. All right,
Yeah.
people don't write letters, people don't type. All right, so it's a really good paper for this, just isn't in demand. And when you find a source of it, you hoard it. You get as much
Hmm.
as you can because very likely a year or two from now it will no longer be available. Right, and
Hmm.
and then speaking of dimensionality, and this is the example, all right, of where I spent many hours trying to find the exact paper because this is if you can see, this is a tube meant for a Smith carbine. That's a American Civil War breech loading carbine. All
Hmm.
right, which is a combination of very thin, um, very thin uh, um, brass that is wrapped around a mandrel between two sets of clamping force paper. All right, and we make a cup. This is made around a mandrel. All right, to make the cartridge. And then this is a black powder cartridge. This one is not combustible, which means when you load it, here's an example. This is a fully loaded one. All right. So
Hmm.
this loads into into the Smith carbine.
Yeah.
When you fire it, you pull out. It does not combust.
Hmm.
Not reusable. All right, but it doesn't. There's no residue left behind. But they do maintain their shape, and most importantly, is they obturate. All right, so you don't, as a shooter, you're not getting a big blast of black powder coming back at you when you
Yeah.
fire it. All right, it opens up just enough to the
Hmm.
seal everything up, and but that's the case where that paper, because everything that we're starting from reverse. We're starting from the inside diameter of the chamber, and then the other aspect was the bullet. So between the inside diameter of the chamber and the outside diameter of the bullet is the thickness of the cartridge. So that all
Hmm.
had to be worked out. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
I get what you're saying. It would take me a little while to figure that all out, but there's no other choice, and that's really why I wanted to make this series
yeah,
of. We're going to probably have to film another video, by the way, because I'm being told by whoever operates this software that we're running out of time. But the
Okay.
reason I wanted to talk to you, Barry, is you're the only one that I know. There must be other people, but you're the only one I know that's mastered all this stuff. And you sent me videos, and I've watched them a few times. And I thought this is going to be crucial because kind of the last gasp for these guns, people are just tossing them, but they're perfectly fine guns. You just
Yeah.
need to figure all this stuff out, which they
Yeah.
will do if somebody tells them how, I think.
Yep, exactly. And maybe just in closing, then, the one of the joys we had recently is an extremely rare rifle. It was called the green rifle, and it was yeah, pre-Civil War, but potentially used in the Civil War. There's some debate on that, but it's the America's first actual bolt-action rifle, and
Hmm.
the mechanism was amazing. You should look it up. You look up the green rifle, not
I
the green
will.
carbine, the green rifle. But that one there, it's another case where dimensionality, it's paper cartridge, fully combustible. All right, which means in the barrel, in the explosion, all the paper gets burned. Anyway, if you think about it, paper doesn't survive the internal chamber pressures that go up, so it does
Mhm.
combust. You
Mhm.
can do things. You can nitrate the paper to make it more combustible,
Right.
but ultimately they do combust. But that's a fascinating one, similar to your monkey tail, where we had to completely reverse engineer it. And we had an event not too long ago where we were able to assemble three operational green rifles, and we did a 3 round volley using them. All
That's
right,
pretty amazing.
probably the first time that's been done since the Battle of Antietam, which is one where there was the Massachusetts unit was rumored to have used the green rifle. So yeah,
Fantastic. Okay, well, Barry, we'll have to reconvene because we're going to run out of time. I'm
okay,
sure people will like this, but I wanted to say thank you actually to the viewers in these states because I wrote down, they give you all kind of analytics, and I have fantastic, there must be fantastic hunting and shooting and gun laws in these states. Maybe I don't have them all. Missouri, Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia, Indiana, Iowa, and South Carolina. That's from my
yeah,
list. So these must be states that are still preserving the freedom of if to own firearms, like the
yeah,
Constitution says. And what was I going to say? I may have missed some, but the ironic thing is, I punched this in and I got a list as if these are bad states. And
of course.
for you and I, these are the good states.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well,
thank you
I
so
live in
much,
one of those
Barry.
states. Indiana is a a really great state to live in if you're into muzzle loading and black powder and these old cartridge guns because we have all the resources here. So,
Yeah, it sounds pretty fantastic. I'll have to come down and visit you now
yeah,
that I'm getting healthy again.
absolutely.
All right, Barry, thank you so much, and we'll see you
Okay.
next time. I'll be
All
in
right.
touch after
Thanks
we
for having
film.
me.
You're welcome.